TitleMatchNetwork.com.
Welcome to another edition of the RF Video Shoot interview series. Today we're joined by legendary world-class announcer Bill Mercer. Thanks for being here today with us.
Pleasure.
It's an honor to be seated here with you. I grew up watching, as I said a couple minutes ago.
Oh, that makes me feel old.
Let's talk about your background and your memories of growing up in Oklahoma.
Oh, Muskogee, Oklahoma. I'm an Okie from Muskogee, just because my parents moved up there from Texas. And did the usual stuff, went to high school. It's a great little town. It was 30,000. Beautiful, like towns were in those days. It was pretty downtown. Had the good theaters, the cowboy movie and all that. And I guess I must have ridden a bicycle a million miles around the area. But it was a lovely place to grow up and a lot of fun. I went to high school, of course. I went out for football in junior high school. And I was small. I'm still small. And so I went out there. We went out and a bunch of us, the freshmen in the 7th grade. And these guys looked like monsters, and they were hitting into each other. And I thought, I'm not gonna live.
Right.
Fortunately, the coach decided I was going to live and made me manager. But I learned a lot being manager of a junior high school football team. After high school, I was, the beginning of the build-up to the war, and I didn't have a high regard for my own ability. Maybe because I couldn't do athletics, but I could not also do math or science. So I was kind of, well, okay, I'll finish up. And it was 1943. I became 17 in 1943 in February. So in June, I looked around. There was nobody there. All my buddies had already gone off to war. So I walked down and volunteered myself to help save the Navy. And my parents had to sign, and I didn't know if they would. I don't know why my mother did. But anyway, they did. I went to the Navy, and the Navy experience. I was a signalman, 5 invasions in the Pacific. But the experience of the Navy, passing the test, going to a signal school, gave me a real burst of confidence. And it wasn't much. It was just, instead of being a guy chipping paint, I was a guy swinging semaphore flags. But I really got a lot of confidence out of that. Liked the Navy. We had a good time. I didn't get hurt. We didn't get hit. And we had some pretty good invasions. But came back, went to college, and met my wife in the first year of college. Thank you. And she was, I don't know why she ever picked me. She's gorgeous. And but by marrying her the next year, because she graduated and was planning to go from Oklahoma to New Mexico to teach. And I thought, I'll never see her again, so we just decided to get married. And by doing that, it's funny how life has little footpaths for you. She had a friend in Denver, Colorado, and they were going to the University of Denver. And they suggested we come out there and go to school. I'd gone to school 2 years in Oklahoma. And I had hay fever really bad in those days. So Colorado had to be better. And we went out there. They had a little so-called radio station in 1947, 8. And I got to, because nobody else wanted to, I went out and broadcast the Denver University football teams, the games, because I wanted to be a sportscaster. So that was one thing with her. I would never thought of going to Denver. I don't know where I would have gone without her. Then after a year of bouncing around after I graduated, we came back to my hometown. She went out to get a teaching deal. And the superintendent said, "Oh, where's Bill? What's he doing?" They knew me, graduated just a few years before. "Oh, he's looking for a sports job." "Oh, well, the station downtown has an opening." Then I went down, kind of didn't lie exactly, but just kind of stretched the truth of how much experience I had.
Right.
Confident as a fool that I could do this, you know. And I'd done a year of football at Denver and a year of basketball. So I really had already learned it. Not really, but I thought I had. So I got the job, and that's where my sport started. Then the other station in town that was really the main one, there a fellow named Bob Murphy of the Jets,
right,
and all that, he was there. And I didn't know who was there, but anyway, I found out later that Bob had been there, and I followed him, and I was doing baseball, basketball, football, Golden Gloves boxing, because it was big in Oklahoma. So I got all the background, the foundation of sports. But about a week after I moved over there, they said, "Oh, we forgot to tell you. There's something else that you've got to do." And I said, "What's that?" "Well, we do a live program of professional wrestling from the Civic Auditorium once a month." And I said, "All right, I've seen a little bit of wrestling on TV once in Chicago when I was on a debate trip. I know nothing about it." But anyway, I met some really great guys, and they showed me the holes, and I wrote them down on a legal pad, and that's the way I started broadcasting wrestling on radio. So the time goes 3 years. A friend of mine was going through Dallas at KRLD and talking, and he knew the people at KRLD. And the chief announcer said, "We've got to find a wrestling announcer for the Sportatorium live on Tuesday night." And my friend said, "I know the greatest wrestling announcer in the world."
Right.
And I told you later, I said, "I think you overstated that a bit, but it worked, so let's don't." So they called me and said, "Come down and audition." I said, "Yeah." So I went down and auditioned, basically for an announcer. They looked at my record of sports and thought, since I had been doing radio wrestling, that I probably could do it. And the transition from a little town to a big town to a big station to television was really something to behold. And I did make it, and that's where everything else happened in my life in Dallas. So I owe wrestling my life coming to Dallas.
Now, before you became a wrestling announcer, you worked as a newscaster too, and you were there and JFK was shot in Dallas, right? You helped cover that story?
Yeah, well, I had a journalism degree, as well as what little bit there was of a radio degree. So I'd studied journalism in college a lot and written stuff. And then when I got to KRLD, and then I did news at the station in Muskogee. But when I arrived at KRLD and been there a while, they didn't really have a news department in 1953, 4 or 5. But along in 5 or 6 years later, Eddie Barker, who was the news announcer and also a staff announcer, talked his way into getting some money and building a news department. And he had a good idea. We were, of course, World War II veterans. And one of my buddies there had been at Guadalcanal in the Marines. I was in the Navy. Another guy was in the Army. And so we had some experience and also some maturity, I think. And so he set up the news department. We continued to do our regular jobs, mine in sports, and the other guy, one guy did the weather, another guy did something else. But we would always start out with the news department. And when we had nothing else to do, we covered stories. And that was how I happened to be. And this surprised some people later on when we were interviewed down there years later. "Well, you were a sports announcer. What are you doing over at news?" I said, "Well, we did stories all the time. I knew how to shoot film and how to shoot a story and camera." So that's how we all happened to be there with all our different interests and cover the Kennedy assassination.
What was it like being in Dallas that day?
Well, it was the time before. Let me lead up to that. Dallas, the world of politics, I think, is worse today than it was then. But as politics goes in every generation, there were all these John Birch societies and all Black Panthers and all these various groups. And General Edwin Walker, who was kicked out of the Army, and why they came to Dallas, I don't know. But they all came to Dallas, and we had a program called Comment, one of the first call-in talk shows. And we interviewed all these people. And we were really close to the scene. Dallas itself was not a dangerous town, but there were a lot of people that were dangerous. So what we were worried about, I was driving back from a college thing I was teaching, and on the night before, Thursday night, and I thought, gosh, I hope they don't embarrass him. I hope they don't throw tomatoes or eggs or go crazy running around the cars. That was what we were afraid of. The day it happened, everything was great. The coming over, the parade down through town, we covered all that. I was on the air doing the noon news when all this happened. That was my job. And so the afternoon exploded. And, it was like everybody had knew about it, but nobody could understand it. Nobody could say why. And there was nobody could tell you why. And I came after the newscast and back over the newsroom, and everybody was in a state of screaming, yelling, crying, everything. And depending on how you could be a reporter, you kind of realized that this was terrible, but we had to do something. So all the guys had been out all day covering the parade, and then they covered the rest of the day's assassination at the hospital, at the airport. So I was the only one who hadn't really been out working hard. I was sitting back there answering the telephones and talking to stations in Boston and up here and everywhere. So that night, the news director said, everybody else has pooped. I'm going to send you over to the police station. And we knew by then that they'd arrested somebody. And so you can, when the book that we wrote, When the News Went Live, that was the day that news went live. We never did a live newscast outside the station. I mean, we filmed everything. That night, the engineers got our remote truck, drove it over to where the third floor of the police station, hoisted the cameras up onto that third floor. Those great, huge cameras they had in the studios in those days, and ran the cable up and into the third floor. And that's when we started. Today, you'd have a producer and floor directors, you'd have communication back to the station. No, this was the first time. So they put me up there with a long microphone, a little longer than this bottle, and a long line of cable. And I was supposed to report. Well, fortunately, we knew the way we worked the news station, the news operation. We knew all the FBI people in town. We knew the sheriff, the cops. So we were known, and we knew them, and they respected us, and we respected them. It was a different world then. And so when I started out about 7 o'clock in the evening, there weren't many media people up there yet. Funny story. The camera was like at that end, and I was down at this end, and the hall was about as wide as from here to the wall. I thought it was pretty wide, but it wasn't. It was cramped. I don't know how we even moved. But as I was stringing my audio cable out with my long microphone along the side of the wall, this guy who'd come in from someplace, he had little cameras all over him, and he was large. And he said, "Hey, what are you doing?" I said, "Well, we have a camera down there, and I'm going to report here live back to the station, and this is my microphone and cable." And he said, "Well, if that cable gets in my way, I'll just yank it out." And I said, "Well," I'm looking up at him, and I got this long mic. I said, "I tell you what you do. You touch that cable, and I'll crack this microphone right over your head. All this is going back to the station.
Right, that's awesome.
That was the way the evening went. I started out interviewing everybody I could see, the district attorney, anybody that came up there, chief of police, the sheriff. Well, after the outside of the area of media started coming in, they didn't know people, but they saw me go over and talk to somebody. So they started kind of like
following you.
Follow me over, and they'd say, "Who are you trying to talk to?" And I'd tell them, "Oh, okay." So they would listen, and then they would start interviewing. And so it worked out pretty well. But that was for that went on for over 5 hours, and Oswald came through the rifle. You've seen all those shots, and Mr. Lee Harvey's mother and Marina, his wife, and the baby. And then after the midnight press conference, they decided to have after midnight, they decided to have a press conference with Lee Harvey Oswald. Everybody's seen it, right? That would not go today. You don't interview a suspect, right?
Right. Yeah.
But to give Dallas credit, they, of course, no news department, no police department at that time would, outside of maybe New York or someplace, would have had this kind of thing to deal with. And the police tried their greatest to accommodate everybody. So they couldn't say, well, the police covered it up or the police were involved and all that. And so my engineer friends moved these big camera downstairs. And it was a mock-up room where people could sit and look at people. And then they had lectures there and all that. So this crazy bunch of reporters came flying in there and took seats. And they brought Oswald in. And it was like everybody had to yell and scream at one time. I mean, there was no way. Some guy would ask a question, he'd start to answer, and then they'd all start questioning. So it only lasted about a minute and a half. And I was sitting, like the camera's here, I was scooted down. I'd moved from my camera down to the stage where Lee Harvey was trying to speak. And he was off to my left a little, and there was a reporter right beside me. And as they were turning to go, the reporter said, "Have you been charged with anything?" And I had already talked to some people in the police department, and I knew what was going down. So he said, "No, I haven't been charged with anything. They haven't told me anything of why I'm here. Like I'm perfectly innocent." So just as he turned, then I said, "You have been charged with the murder of the president." And he said, "What?" And I said, "You've been charged with the murder of the president." That was my one moment of great fame.
Wow, but still, it's a big moment,
Yeah, and
you actually told him.
And then he goes out.
Wow. What was your reaction when Jack Ruby shot him?
I wasn't there that day. I was watching it on the monitors. Total dismay. Again, the police, that's where they made a huge mistake. And I'm sure they recognize that. They wanted the media to cover it. And why, I don't know. Moving a guy from point A to point B, the sheriff's office, which he had to do because of Texas law. That's okay. So they move him. So what? We don't need to have a picture of that or watch that. In retrospect, do we? I mean, it was not the thing to do.
Right.
Then they changed the time. Then they changed the way he was going down there. With all of that, Jack Ruby, who was a mousy, sleazy little character, had the club. One of his strippers had called him and needed $25 really fast. That was a lot of money then. So he went to the Western Union Station, which is just down the street, took his dog, which he loved better than anybody else other than himself, with him and left him in the car. And he saw the commotion down at the police department. He may have known when they were going to do this. I'm not sure. But after he sent the telegram and the money order, he walked down there. Here again was a mistake, a little mistake. People said, oh, somebody told him, somebody helped him in. No, nobody helped him in. What happened was he came down there and the cops went out. They were staying at the entrance to keep anybody from going down. But they were going to send a decoy car out so that if anybody tried to shoot him on the way. So the decoy car is coming out. The cops come from here out to the curb and into the street. Jack Ruby walks in behind them. Nobody else there. He goes in and around, and he stood next to our cameraman, George Phoenix. And George didn't know, he couldn't see anything. He's got that big rabbit ears camera. Mm-hmm. So that's how he got in. Everybody, you know, all the people, the conspiracy people say, oh, if somebody let him in, the cops knew and they wanted to kill him. And nobody wanted him killed. We wanted to find out what if he would say anything. We didn't want Lee Harvey killed.
Do you think Lee did it?
Yeah.
Okay.
No question. Is there a conspiracy? You're going to ask me that question.
Of course.
There might be. But after 51, this is the 51st year, isn't it? You'd think, like Deep Throat in the Nixon thing, would come around and say, okay, you know,
this is why
I did it, I'm dying, but I'll tell you what happened. But they're still, well, they're going hard and heavy on conspiracies, and Cuba, the FBI, the mafia. Nixon was in town. It must have been him. LBJ, because LBJ didn't like Kennedy and they didn't like each other. And, I mean, you know, you've got all this stuff. And so when we wrote the book, when the news went live, the four of us went around talking about our experience covering this thing. And every time there was a conspiracy thing. So just before we finished up one of these, we'd not argue with them, just say, we've covered everything. We don't know if there's a conspiracy. There may be, but we're not going to fret over it for the rest of our lives. So just before we leave, I said, listen, let me tell you one thing about a conspiracy. Lee Harvey Oswald is a kind of a sleazy guy himself. Been to Russia, came back, didn't do well in Russia, hasn't done well here, joined up with the Communist Party and sort of thing in New Orleans, wanted to go to Cuba, they wouldn't let him in, so he's all running around doing all this stuff. And he has a wife, he has his Russian wife here, and he can't make a living. He doesn't know how to make a living. He got the job at the book depository. So you would think then, if there's a conspiracy, somebody helped him get the job at the depository, right? It was just pushing boxes around. And then he buys this cheap rifle out of Chicago, $25, $30 rifle, Italian job with a scope. Now, he'd been in the Marines, so he knew how to shoot a rifle. Whether he was a good shot or not, I don't know, but he had a scope on it. And he shoots the president, puts the rifle away in a corner to hide it. I said he had a scope. I've got to correct myself. I'm not sure of that. It's been so long, I forget about the pictures. But anyway, he shot the rifle. He made the hits. He goes in and puts the rifle away, walks downstairs, gets a coat, walks out the front door. They didn't have the side doors like they have today. And walks over to Elm. And now, if I'm in a conspiracy, I got a plan, right? Somebody's going to pick me up. Somebody's going to do something so I can get out of town or whatever. There's nothing there except traffic going by. He stands there and decides, walks down the street, catches a bus to Oak Cliff. A bus. This is part of his getaway. The bus isn't going anywhere because the traffic is just humongous. Like New York traffic now, I guess.
Yeah.
And So he fools around there for a minute and then decides, well, he'll go over and get a cab. Goes over, gets a cab, goes over to his apartment in not far from there in Oak Cliff. Has a little one-room apartment because he was separated from his wife. She lived out in Grand Prairie, middle part of the area, and gets a pistol and walks down the street. Great plan to escape, right? I would want to escape if I did something like that.
Right.
I mean, that's human nature to try to get away. So he runs into Tippett, the cop, who recognizes, already had a message out on him. So he gets out of the car, unfortunately, and Lee Harvey shoots him in front of 12 witnesses. Then he hurries down the street into Jefferson into the what is Oak Cliff's business section over there. It was not as big as it is now, but so the Tippett is shot, and the police come flying over there, and Oswald is trying to look nondescript, but a guy watched him and saw him looking around and turning around and going in the front of the shops and down. And then the cops were racing up and down the street looking. They had a description that matched the same description they had from the depository. So, Oswald goes in the theater, did not buy a ticket. If he'd bought a ticket, the guy might not have paid any attention. Did not buy a ticket, just slipped in. And that's where they caught him.
It's a crazy story.
It is a crazy story.
Yeah.
There are so many holes in it of whys and who. Oswald shot at General Edward Walker a 3 weeks before, the right-wing general that was living there. Missed him. They know it was because after Oswald shot Kennedy, they went over and pulled the bullet out and compared, and they matched, yeah. So I don't know if he'd have killed the general, if he'd have gone on and killed the president or not, but we've talked about it, for years, and I think the main thing was he just wanted to be recognized. He wasn't at all, but then he was.
You talked a little bit earlier, because I want to transform into the wrestling part of the interview.
Yeah.
You're, pretty much a sports announcer, and you got pretty much put into the wrestling, not because you wanted to, but because, they needed somebody to call the action.
That's the way life is in this business.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I can do that. Just give me something.
Was the first wrestling show, was that a studio show, or was it filmed in the arena?
In Dallas?
Yeah.
Oh, it was a Sportatorium.
So it was the arena.
It was the arena, yeah. Terrible place.
How did you prepare to call wrestling for the first time?
I went there, and I'd already met all the people down there, but I knew the holes, and I knew how the thing worked.
You were already smartened up to the business?
I'd figured that out.
Okay. None of the guys helped you?
Oh no, they just told me things.
Okay.
We didn't really talk about the business end of it or how things were planned. They wanted me to go to planning meetings later on, and I said, no, you're talking about the build up to this and who wins, who loses sort of thing. I don't want to know that. Because if I know it, then I don't know that I could
react the way you want.
React like I want to, which is sometimes it went one way and sometimes it went another. So I just did a lot of, wrestling broadcasting is really talking about the people, and the holes are there, but it's like TV announcers today don't tell you who the basketball players are. They just suppose that because you're watching, you know everything, I guess. But that I would give a hold occasionally, but I was trying to build up these battles between the guys and all that. And this took time. After CBS took over the Tuesday night slot, they took over all the network all the time. Then we moved to studio wrestling, which was another kick that we did in the morning in Channel 4. And that was fun. It was different.
You always called the business, and you took it very serious. A lot of announcers would treat wrestling as if it was silly at the time, but you had the reputation of pretty much treating the business as a serious sport. What led you to taking that approach?
The guys doing it, I met them. They were serious about what they had to do and how they had to do it. It was a very hard business to be in as a wrestler. I saw broken bones and busted noses and all this. And I just decided, okay, I don't know how I'm going to do this stuff really, but I'm just going to do it like a sports event because that's what it is. In my mind, it was a sports event. Various other things were different, but I respected the participants. The very bad ones, some of them I didn't like to be around too much, and they were great. But it just was like a football game, or that the teams come together and they battle and they throw each other around. And I'd done boxing, which in a way was something like it, only the difference on the outcome.
As a reporter, did you feel working in the wrestling conflicted with your journalistic integrity, given the business is a work?
I got a lot of kidding from my fellow broadcasters, and some of them. I said, "Why do you do that?" I said, "Well, it's kind of a hobby. I like to do it. It's fun. I get paid a little bit. Fritz Von Erich didn't pay much to anybody.
We'll talk about him.
But yeah, but then it was a big deal in Dallas, and at the time I got there, people were wearing suits and women wearing dresses.
Right.
It was an event. It was a big event, and so I saw no reason to go in there and make fun of people and all that. And I wasn't smart enough to make fun of them anyway. I just did the job. I just figured that people watched it, they liked it, they wanted to know what was going on, and that's what a broadcaster's job is for.
How well was the business protected from you and others who weren't in workers but worked in the business back then? Did they protect the business a lot?
Oh yeah, the guys. I'm trying to think. They never. They went through it like it is a business, and it is a business. But I didn't ask them anything about any, other than their things that they were doing that I wanted to use during the bout. But we didn't really discuss anything much about it. If I had a question that bothered me about something, I would ask, about being thrown out of the ring.
Right.
How do you fall or something? We had a couple of guys down there were doing this run together in the middle and then hit the ring and then come back. The third time they hit the ropes, the corner buckle gave way, and out onto the hard concrete floor, both sides, and they didn't come back for a long time. And I thought, whoa. I know how they catch themselves when they're thrown over the ropes, but what happens when you do that? There's no way to catch it. So that's the kind of thing that I would inquire. And then I had some friends in the Von Erichs later on, and a bunch of the guys that I knew who wrestled around, and I would ask them, "Hey, I don't want to get too inside your business, but what about this?" I can't think of what it would be right now.
Right.
But it was, and then they'd make a mistake. Gary Hart had the great kabuki.
Yep.
And kabuki spread the green stuff.
Yeah.
So I'd interview Gary, and Gary. Now here's the way Gary and I worked. To give you an idea of what we're talking about. Gary and I would, before we ever started doing each other, he said, "Okay, now I'm going to consider you the professional journalist and professor," because I was teaching. I said, "Okay, and I will consider you a ne'er-do-well sleazy manager. How's that? That's great. That we'll get along fine. And so that's the way we treated each other. And this one time I was going to interview him in Kabuki. And Kabuki was, Gary said something to him, and Kabuki turned to me, and instead of just talking, he went, and spread the green stuff over me on my coat.
That's all right. And
Kabuki, every time I'd see him after that, would apologize. If I saw him today, he'd apologize 50 years later. But yeah, that's the kind of association we had. We knew each other, and we knew what they were doing and what I was doing. So.
Was wrestling easier to call than other sports?
No, it wasn't, because there were things that would, especially back in the old 2 out of 3 fall era, things got very slow.
Right.
And if you
a lot of rest holds.
Yeah. Oh man. And they had to rest a lot. And so I had to have a lot of information. And if I ran out of my information, I had to kind of not make it up, but make something or go
right
about the next week's bouts, or this. It's rather like a rain out in baseball. You better have some information, or it's maybe a long time. So, but then the pace picked up, and we only had 2 falls, or and so the pace and the excitement really increased, and I think it was good for the sport. It was certainly easier to do one of those than 2 out of 3 falls, and what we always did was finish the show on 2 out of 3 falls, and then they both want to fall, and next week we'll bring you
right cliffhanger.
Yeah. So that was the biggest problem I had early on, was filling time when they were not going fast. Later on, there was so much going on, later in the Von Erich era and all that man, you just hung on.
Now you moved from I guess Oklahoma over to Dallas,
mm-hmm.
and then you got involved with Fritz Von Erich's territory. How did that come about?
Well, I met him when he was wrestling at the Sportatorium, and then he came back, and we had a good relationship. Again, he knew when I was gigging him, and he would gig me. I'll give you a little story. I'll tell stories.
Awesome.
But there were two sports writers. One of them is gone now, Bob Galt. The other is Frank Boggs, who is a dear friend of mine. I learned a lot from him in journalism, and so we talk occasionally. We're great baseball fans. So they were kidding me about Fritz and all that, and that was the studio wrestling time. So I said, why don't you guys just come over and watch it one day? Just come over, and then you can kind of get an idea if you want to write a column or whatever you want to do, and how we do it, and how the whole thing is done. So they came over there, and I already had this idea. So they were sitting there, excuse me, and so Fritz had his bout, and I was interviewing him, standing right on the apron of the ring, and they were sitting right there, and 5, 6 feet away. And so I was gigging him a little bit about stuff, and I said, by the way, you've got a few years on you now. Whoa, I'm not so old. I said, a couple of sports writers that I know, Bob Galt and Frank Boggs, they thought you were over the hill. I was talking to them about that. And so Fritz kind of buying the thing, because he knew them from the Times Herald, but he didn't let on. He said, well, those guys, they're on that voice. I'll find them, and I'm just going to, I'll get the building and throw them out the window. And I said, well, I don't think you have to do that. That was just a point that you are getting a little older, and you've got a family now and all. So we went over after that, we went over to the Times Herald. He and I went upstairs, and we come out on the sports floor, and he starts yelling, and of course he can be heard all over town. Where's Bob? Where's Galt and Brooke? So they were down at the other end, and they got up and said, "Hi, Fritz, how are you?" And he came down and said, "I ought to throw you guys out the window." And that's a great story, and he was good for that kind of thing.
What are your first memories of the Sportatorium? And was it as bad of a dump as everybody says it was?
It was pretty darn bad. It was, of course, built after the original was burned down. Just before I got there, they had this great wrestling war. A part of it was because the promoter wouldn't join the NWA, the National Wrestling Association, and so they put another promotion in another venue, and they had the wrestling people. So then all of a sudden it burns down one night, and nobody's ever found out who did it, but everybody knew who did it.
Yeah. So
they built a new building, and it was just a frame with aluminum siding all around, heavy aluminum siding. There was no air conditioning, and there was practically no heat in the winter. Of course, we didn't have very bad winters, but back in those days, it used to get cold.
Yeah.
And then we had probably the worst area to buy food. You know, it was all, slop. I mean, it was just
bad concession stands.
Oh, God, yeah. A lot of cholesterol. And the restrooms were absolutely terrible. And I don't know if they ever cleaned it. I guess they swept it out. But the design was good. The design was an octagonal.
Right.
So everything pointed to the ring, and every seat was a good seat. There were some way up in seats, but the design, Willie Nelson would come there every year because he started his career there, and we'd have concerts there. We had a Saturday night, Big D Saturday night, and Big D Jamboree, and they had a show there every Saturday, what they had that Friday night or something? No, anyway, it was one of the nights in the weekend, every week, and they had all the Western singers and all the newcomers came in. So it was a well used arena, but at the time in the 50s, nobody noticed it so badly because there wasn't much air conditioning anyway at the time.
Right.
And the heat, everybody wore their coats and all that. So, but later on, it became worse and worse. And when we started World Class, the camera crew would all go back to the station. They wouldn't go to the bathroom there, and they would not eat anything from there.
Was that bad?
So they had to be catered, and it was really a dump.
What was the wrestling fans like back in that time period?
Well, the early days in the 50s, as I said, it was still suits and ties and dresses, and then it became a lot less. Television came in, so that hurt going to the bouts live, and the wrestling fans became this stereotype that everybody was following for in 60s, 70s, 80s.
Yeah.
And they were interesting people. They
Still
were
are today.
wholeheartedly wrestling fans, but they were tough. The little lady down at the side of the ring who would get up and swat them with a cane or something.
I think she used to attack Chris Adams back in the day.
Yeah. And but they were different. They evolved into this strata of people with different economic level, and they were dedicated. Boy, I mean, they were something else.
Was Fritz Von Erich promoting around this period of time, or was it a different? Okay, it was Fritz.
It was after the the promoter died, and he was working with him.
Okay. Who was the promoter before Fritz?
You know, you got me. Why did you do that? This is age. I know him. I can see him. Maybe I'll think of his name.
That's okay.
But he was a great man, a good guy, and he had brought it all along for a long time. He was the one that didn't want to join the National Wrestling Alliance. And why can't I remember his name? Anyway, Fritz worked with him, and then when he died, he took over. He and the daughter became partners, but that didn't work out, and so she got out, or he bought her out, or whatever. And then he was a promoter from, let's see, in the 60s, I guess, and on. And because I worked for him after that, after the television went dead, and we went local stations, I worked for him doing the Fort Worth deal. He had both of them. Right. And
I'm going to talk all about that coming up.
Yeah. And of course, all the places around Texas, the whole scene that he
owned the whole territory.
The territory.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got the terms about.
Oh, of course. Well, let's talk about you took a little bit of a break from announcing wrestling, and you went to call baseball.
Yeah, calling wrestling, as I said, was kind of my hobby. I had fun with it. I enjoyed it, but I had the opportunity, and always looking forward to doing, as it then turned out. I wasn't so interested in. I did college. I was in the University of North Texas after I'd been at KRLD for 4 years. And then in 1960, the Dallas Texans and the Dallas Cowboys decided to both have a team there at the same time.
Right.
And that didn't work too well. And I worked for the Texans. In 1959, my whole career started about the late 50s. 1959, there was just no programming, for the radio stations. There was a station in town, KLIF, that set up the top 40 thing, and they ran off with all of it. So KRLD decided they had to do something, and I was there, so they decided they did Highland Park High School football. It's the first time they'd done anything like that. And then in 59, they picked up the Dallas-Fort Worth, the Dallas franchise, baseball franchise. And that had evolved into, and it was dying off. Double-A ball then in those days, because of television, just went down the drain. And another problem for Dallas, their ballpark was in Oak Cliff, and Oak Cliff was dry. And you can't have baseball without beer. And it's just, we'd have fans, but it was never very successful. But anyway, for me, it was successful because they did it, and I was the one that did it in 1959 on through into the Texas Rangers. That was my idea, really, was baseball. I loved baseball and I did baseball in Muskogee. So that's where I started, Class C, Western Association. And then this was AAA, and Dallas Eagles and Dallas, anyway. Then the two cities combined, and it was the Dallas-Fort Worth Rangers. And we would go to Fort Worth and broadcast a game in the afternoon, 106 degrees, and then come back over and do a game in Dallas at Burnett Field at night, doubleheader days. And but I was learning baseball, and so I couldn't do wrestling anymore with that schedule. So I just got out of it, and until then I did the Dallas Cowboys started in 1965. And went through 72, and then went to the Texas Rangers, and then the White Sox. And I'd been gone. Occasionally, if something, I had a day off or something. If somebody was sick, I'd go down and fill in. But that was about it.
Did you miss the business?
No, not really.
Okay.
Except, well, yeah, I missed the guys. We were in New York, and I was walking along with the ball club, and I think it was, shoot, man, you got me where I can't remember names tonight. Anyway, a couple of the big wrestlers were walking down there, and they saw me, and they come tearing over and pick me up and hold me up in the air. Hey, it's the little Mercer guy, and all the ball players are looking at these huge guys.
Right.
And what they're doing to their broadcasters. So I would miss it, and when I'd see those guys, and occasionally run into them, but I was too busy with the baseball stuff and football. Yeah. I was doing football and everything.
You also called the Dallas game that was outside in, I forgot where Dallas was. It was the coldest game in the history of the business.
Yeah, that was the Dallas Cowboys in 68 or 67 at Green Bay.
Yeah.
The Ice Bowl.
So you were basically the play-by-play guy for the radio, right?
I was play-by-play radio, yeah.
Well, crazy game, freezing out. But
it was 35 below zero that morning.
It's pretty cold.
And it's still 20 below zero when the game started. It was the coldest thing I've ever worked in. I've been around cold weather, but it was awesome.
What led you to get back into the wrestling business?
My baseball career had kind of ended because the White Sox were sold, and Harry Carey wanted him back, and they didn't want me back, so that was okay. And then every time I got a job offer, it wasn't enough money to move my family of four. I mean, it was just not possible. So I missed out on a couple of places to go in baseball, and I had gone back to teaching and doing North Texas, and Fritz called and said, "You're back." I said, "Yeah, it's been a long journey. Well, I need a good announcer." And I said, "Well, I hope you find one." So anyway, he asked me to come back, and that was when I came back in 76.
Okay. We heard that you were the connection for Mickey Grant, who was the major producer for World Class to get into the business. Can you talk about your early meetings with Grant and how he got involved in wrestling?
Oh, Mickey. He was something. I had a job at KVIL in Dallas in 76, in addition to teaching at North Texas, in addition to all my other stuff. And I was a morning sports announcer. It was a great gig. Only had to work from 5:30 to 9, and sometimes we had special deals. But so I came in, and Mickey Grant was sort of the gopher for the main morning disc jockey, and he ran errands. He did everything. He did all the crazy stuff that Ron Chapman wanted him to do. So we would sit around and talk between my broadcasts. I had sports every half hour, and so I was doing wrestling then, and also at KVIL. And Mickey was a entrepreneur type film person who had already shot a film or documentary or two, had been to Taiwan, working over there, but he was interested in wrestling because it was this business that he knew nothing about. So we talked about it nearly every day. And he said, "Well, it seems like that they don't have any creativity." I said, "Oh, no. It's a wide shot, medium shot, wide shot, medium shot. Now, if you have to have a close-up, you've got to stop all the stuff and do an interview at the side of the ring." But that was it. Wide shot, medium shot, wide shot, medium shot. No real close-ups of the wrestlers, no. And it was, it was wrestling in 1976 in Fort Worth. So he said, "Can we do better than that?" I said, "Well, yeah, I guess we could." I said, "Let's just talk it over and keep talking about it." Well, at the time, I was buying new television equipment in North Texas for a course I taught and for the school to use in promotion of the football and basketball games. And the equipment got better and better and better. And so in Mickey, then we talked about. I said, "Look, the equipment's going to be the cameras are going to be much better." But he had to go do a movie in Hollywood, someplace. So he was gone for a while. Came back, and by the time he got back in, it was 78 or 9. The cameras were really great by then. You know, they were beautiful. The handheld, like bigger than this one, but able to be carried around. So we started kind of plotting it out. What could we do? Well, we need tight shots. Yeah, we need instead of medium and wide, we need wide, medium, and a tight shot in there. You get a close up of the wrestling, get a close up of the activity of these guys with the huge muscles. And I said, well, how do we do that? I don't know where we're going to do it. And he said, then we need a lot of audio, more of the sound of the crashing around the ring. And okay, that's good. We know we can do that. And so we went through this whole thing of, in our minds and on paper, building a wrestling show. Lo and behold, Mickey gets a job at Channel 39 in Dallas as program producer. And it was owned by the Evangelist.
Right. Yeah. It was a Christian TV station.
Yeah, Christian TV station.
Yep.
But they weren't doing much. I mean, they reached a point where that's all they had the Christian programming. But for some reason, he talked them into the fact that wrestling would really bring in some new people, and they probably stay and watch the Christian shows or lead into it. And how he got those Christian people to figure it out, I don't know. But anyway, so he calls me up. He's so excited. He could hardly understand him at times. He said, we're going to do the show. I said, okay. I can get all the equipment we need. So we sat down and went over the newest cameras. We had Oz Coleman, who's one of the great cameramen of all time. We talked about, hey, we got to have him on the apron of the ring.
Which was never been done
Never
before.
had done before.
Yep.
And we had the cameras up, the steady camera. But we got to do the ring around the edge of the ring. These guys have to really be in athletics ability. And we talked to the cameraman about it and said, man, what if they hit us? Oh, they won't hit you. They're afraid of you because they're not sure that you'll pick up their signs and when they're telling something what they're going to do.
Spots,
yeah, the spots. And I said, so don't worry about that. And they won't bother you at all because they'll find out. Mickey and I were talking about it, that this is the first time they've really been seen, a close up, and all that, and the good-looking Von Erich boys. So we went to Fritz, Mickey and I, and said, before that we'd gone to him and said, we got this idea, and we can go to 39 and do it, but we'd like to promote it if you'd support us as promoters. And no, he wouldn't do that. No, that's not.
Fritz didn't want to do it?
No, he didn't want it. He didn't want us to be promoters.
Ah, okay.
Of that particular show.
Right.
And we had the idea, but it didn't make any difference. So then Mickey took Fritz to 39, and they made the deal. It was our show, but it was 39's, and Fritz always took credit for the fact that he thought of the show. But I worked for 39, so I got a decent salary. And Mark Lawrence, who had been doing the announcing in the ring, and had been around for a long time, and a very sharp guy. I'll see him after a long day, long time. He took over the Fort Worth, and we put World Class in Dallas on Friday night. And now, that was as far as we could take it. You know, we were doing the physical part, the film, and beautiful color and all this. But what happened was this great. The wrestling god said, "Okay, here are all this great talent," and it was like, where did these guys come from? Where did all this come from? Where did Precious and Sunshine and gorgeous Jimmy Garvin and Gino Hernandez and all these people? It was just like you had a call for talent in a serial for television.
Yeah, I mean, the talent in the 80s and the late 70s was amazing down there. What was Fritz Von Erich like as a boss?
Oh, he was hamstrung by thinking he knew everything. And he was hard-nosed. He didn't want to pay much. That's when he ran into trouble with some of the wrestlers because of it. His own kids. It was just, he never really, it was a problem as far as telling us what to do. Though he tried to. He got religion, and which is okay. But then, because he got tied up with this particular minister, he came to me, and this is world class, which moving on. He wanted me to have the minister on to do color. I didn't have a color announcer.
All right.
And I said, no way. Why not? I said, I know he's going to start talking about, no, he won't talk about religion. I said, there's not a minister alive with that opportunity he wouldn't start talking about religion some way. And I'm not against religion. It doesn't fit, Fritz. Well, can you go up and interview him? I said, okay, I'll interview him. So we interviewed him once, and that was the end of that. But that's the kind of stuff he would do occasionally. And his religious beliefs, and that really played a great part in the latter into the Von Erich story.
We'll talk about that.
Yeah.
Going back to the pilot, what was Fritz Von Erich's reaction to the pilot before and after he saw the footage? Did he like the way it turned out?
You know, I don't remember. Okay. Undoubtedly he did.
Were the wrestlers cautious about being filmed so close
well,
up?
They were cautious at first, and then they realized once they saw it that, hey, this is great. We can be stars with this.
Do you think Mickey Grant gets the credit he deserves for the evolution of production in the business?
No. I tell you, the lady at WWE, or what it was before.
WWF, yeah.
McMahon.
Linda McMahon?
Well, several years ago, I don't know, it's been quite a few years ago, we talked to them about the show, and that they wanted to, they were going to buy it, or they were going to get the whole thing,
The library footage, yeah.
Yeah. And she said, and she offered this. She said, you know what you two did? You changed wrestling, the two of you. We didn't know what we were doing, but we did. She said, because you were way ahead of everybody. You were ahead of us. And we took that as the best compliment and the best that Mickey could ever have, because, I have to say that Mickey did most of the hard work. All I did was come in and do the other stuff and work with the people. But we figured it out together, and he certainly deserves a recognition in some wrestling history that it was a new world.
Did Mickey create the signature opening with the shot of Earth with the satellite beaming down?
They did that at the station, yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think it was, a lot of that was his idea. And what his ideas were, and this was in fact, he and the directors would get into it because he's very creative. And so he wanted to do these features, which really set it apart from any other wrestling show or any show. So we did those little features where we'd take, we had, gorgeous Jimmy Garvin lost a bout, so he had to go out to the ranch. And that's
for a day type of deal.
I went over to Sunshine. Huh?
The Freebirds in the bar?
Always. They would invite me, and then they wouldn't buy me lunch. But the other one that was one of the most most fun, I guess, Sunshine, who was just fantastic at the beginning of this, sort of had a downfall, and she had to leave. And so here comes this new woman in with Jimmy Garvin. And we said, who's this? Precious. Who's Precious? She's just Precious. So we didn't know who she was at the beginning. But then, of course, it got around that she was his wife. But so the beginning of it was this, who is this woman? Who is this new Sunshine working with Garvin? So I said on the air, we should go out and talk to her and Jimmy sometime. So we set up the camera, and I walked up to the door. I don't know if you've seen this.
I've seen all of this, yeah.
Yeah. And I knock on the door, and she opens it, and she's in this real skimpy little teddy thing, you know. And we didn't rehearse this. And I said, oh, Precious. And she said, yes. I said, is Jimmy here? Yes, but he can't talk to you. And closed the door.
It was good stuff.
And it was all great. David and I riding those Palomino horses into the sunset, and Willie Nelson said, don't grow up, let your boys grow up to be cowboys. I wish I had a copy of that.
I might be able to get you footage of all that stuff. So
all right.
Yeah. Let's talk about building the syndication of the series. How did that happen, and how did World Class get so many overseas TV deals?
They had a syndication program. Of course, they had their money from Channel 39 and the commercialization, but they started trying to peddle it, around the country.
Even international too.
Yeah. So they started, and they had contacts through Fritz in the Mideast and in Japan.
Israel, yeah.
And because all the wrestlers had been everywhere. But we didn't know this. I didn't know it. Mickey didn't follow that as closely as doing the production. And one day I got a call. I was teaching in North Texas, and this young man who was he was Arabian and living in Israel, in Nazareth, called me. And he said, it was a friend of mine. He was an athlete at North Texas, a soccer kicker, and kicked extra points and field goals, football. So he called me one day and he said, Beetle, guy, do you know what's happening to the show? I said, no, nobody tells me anything. I just do my bit and hope it goes. Have you heard about Nazareth? I said, no, I know Nazareth from the Bible, but I don't know anything else. And he said, well, my mother and my brothers, his family live in Nazareth. I said, yeah. And when this show goes on, I said, it's in Israel? And he said, yeah, it's showing there. He says, when the show goes on, the shops close and everybody finds a place to go to watch the show. I said, you mean a shop or two? And they know the whole town shuts down. And we have about 20 people in my mother's house watching the show. I said, for crying out loud, I didn't know that. And because then syndication, and we didn't meet very much. And so he said, I tell you what, I got a problem. I said, okay. I've talked to my mother and my brother over there, but they don't believe that I know the Von Erichs, and they don't think that I know you. And I said, why not? He said, well, they just don't believe me. How could you know somebody as great and big as they are? Right. Not realizing they were just guys doing this show. And I said, okay, what do you want to do? I said, I want to call over there and have you talk to them. I said, I can't speak your language. Well, that's all right. I can interpret for you. So we did that. And I talked to his mother, and she just screamed bloody murder. And then we started looking around, and the show was just everywhere. And it was, the syndication people just did a wonderful job with it.
In hindsight, do you think it was funny that I guess a Jewish country was in love with a product that had such Christian overtones?
Did we have a Christian overtone?
A little bit here and there.
I didn't realize that. You mean because of 39, or
probably because of 39? Yeah.
It might have been something they stuck in there. I don't know, because we didn't.
Yeah, there's
as I said, we weren't involved in that at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. How can we be so popular? I was the fourth most popular TV personality in Israel, behind the Von Erichs.
That's awesome.
And then that Fritz went over there to do some shows and didn't take us to do the regular kind of show we had.
Let me ask you, why do you think World Class never ran tapings outside of the Texas market? It seems like they would have done great, especially over there.
I don't know. Fritz, he afraid he'd lose control, and he had these shows that had to go all around Texas. He was more interested in that than doing something like that. We should have gone everywhere.
Yeah.
I mean, and it only, you could get all the production equipment and everybody over there, the cameraman and everybody. And it just took a ticket from me and producer, Mickey maybe. He was just so selfish, he wouldn't do it.
We talked a little bit earlier on about your first impressions of Fritz Von Erich. Let's talk about the Von Erich boys. Let's talk about.
They kind of grew up. We kind of grew up together. I knew them. They'd hang around the Sportatorium, and by the time they came in. David Von Erich had come to North Texas to play basketball and go to school. Then Kevin came in to play football. And at that time, they were starting wrestling. World Class was starting and had moved along, and Fritz took David out of college and put him into the wrestling field. One of his first big bouts was his Harley race, which he won, and that set off that part of the career. Then Kevin couldn't play football anymore, so he got out of college, and he had bad knees, but he could wrestle. And then the rest of them came along. But they were good kids, good guys, except I never thought that David was involved with drugs. Maybe Kevin some. But the rest of them, yeah, they were. The drug situation was really bad down there then. And they just...
We'll talk about the drugs.
They built the program. It really took off when they were in it.
What are your first memories of Kerry Von Erich?
Oh, Kerry. He was a big old puppy dog, and he would always hug me. He was like your little brother, only about twice the size. Unfortunately, he was not given a great amount of intelligence.
A lot of people say that.
It's not his fault. I mean, he could do his business, but he didn't listen very well and didn't apprehend or comprehend things. He was easily led astray.
What about Kevin? First memories of Kevin? Or any thoughts?
Kevin was the football player. He was the exciting halfback. And he had, he'd run around the ring. He was my barefoot boy with cheeks of tan from the old poem. And he was a good kid. And he's still a great friend of mine, even though I haven't seen him in years. David was the rock.
He was the workhorse, right? He was pretty much the best worker out of all of them.
He was the best.
Yeah.
You could always count on him. And he was independent. He had his own mind. And he and his father didn't, it clashed a lot. And then he went off to Florida. And so then he came back, unfortunately. But those three, at first, David and Kevin, carried the show. I mean, they were, it was, the Sportatorium was like a renaissance. Girls and youngsters and teenagers and college kids, and they just overshadowed all the wrestling fans. And they built the show. And then Kerry came along and could do his part, which was the heavy lifting. But I tell you, when David died, a few weeks after, some weeks after, we were, it was probably a month or so, the TV people and I were talking and said, "Have you noticed something? Something's gone out of this thing. The heart is going out of it." The wrestling guys, Kevin and Kerry, are still there, and they still do a good job. And the other guys, but David was the key to the whole thing. And it was really, I've never really seen that before. I've been in plays and things, but never seen the heart of something just be taken out. And God, it was just. Now, they still dispute why and how he died.
I was going to ask you. I mean, I've heard the rumors about drugs in Japan.
But I never associated David with drugs. I thought the others, I knew the others from just being around and watching him with Gino and all the other people. But I never thought of David that. He was married, kids, and but he may. I mean, he was young and people try those things. But, it was the official diagnosis was that.
Tested.
Yeah. Well, I had an operation one time, and it was a simple operation. Slept home, went home after it, fine. Woke up the next morning, and I started to have the worst pain I ever felt in my life. And in about an hour, I was back in the hospital. In another hour, I was back in the operating room. When they put it together, they pinched off my intestine. And that's what happened. Officially, his got pinched off, closed off, right?
Right.
And man, I've never been in such excruciating pain in my life, and nothing to do about it. And so I kind of understand that and what could have happened, and it could have just knocked him out. But that'll always be a sensible argument. I just will always look at David as one of my favorite people, fine young man.
Some feel that Fritz forced them into the business too young.
He forced everybody into the business. Of course it was too young. Of course, nobody in that family could have their own career. There's poor Chris at the end. He was about my size and heavier and didn't have that talent, and he's going to be a Von Erich. Poor Mike. He couldn't uphold the name of Von Erich. And the kid was a wonderful guy. They loved him. He worked at 39 just part-time for fun when he was in high school. And then he got sick. And I mean, I was close to his doctor, and he and I talked the night that we thought he was going to die. And the fever broke. And but he said he's not going to be the same. 108, whatever the fever was. He said he's got some wires that are going to be cut. And sure enough, it was. There were things that happened later. And then Fritz brings him back. And he's not ready. And they had no ability to say no. It was just awful. He looked bad. He wasn't in shape. I mean, it was just a disgrace. And I did an interview with him before he did that last bout. It was, his mind never stayed in the same pathway. And I won't tell you all the stuff about it because, but it was just sad that this boy, who was just a wonderful kid, just like all the rest of them were, went out and died on the beach of a lake.
I'm going to ask you about that. What about Doris Von Erich? A lot of isn't really spoken about her. What was her role in the company? Drew, what are your memories of her?
She was a nice lady. She was, I never knew of her being associated with the company just because I guess I didn't pay attention or I didn't know. But she was always gracious, and she came down to the Sportatorium. She probably did some work upstairs in the office that I never saw, but she was a great lady. And of course, she'd already had her own disaster with the first boy dying, being electrocuted. Yeah. And I was out there after David died. I was out at the house, and they brought the body back, but they didn't embalm in Japan. He'd been over there, 2 weeks or something. And they said, you don't want to. She demanded, I don't care. I've got to be sure that it's my son. And I don't know what the outcome was, but she made him take her down to see him. And then she finally, when Mike killed himself, that really threw her over the top with Fritz, because she just, Fritz, you ruined all these boys.
Memories of David's funeral.
It was in Denton, right? Yeah. And it was enormous. Thousands of people were there. It just, it was awesome. All the fans and everybody was just, devastated. It was a triumph for him. As a nice young kid.
You and Mickey put together an incredible tribute episode to David when he passed away. You remember that?
Yeah. That was probably one of the best things I ever did. And we just ad-libbed it.
How did you feel about Fritz when he used David's passing as a way to build for Kerry challenging Ric Flair for the world title? Did that bother you that he was?
Yeah, it bothered me. It bothered me, and it was all. I was out. We went out and filmed. I guess you've seen that.
Yeah.
Around the lake area there, and the way that went.
Yep.
God's on our side and all this. And then using that death to get Kerry to win the championship from Ric Flair. I thought it was just an insult to David. That's the one. I didn't do it. I didn't do that show. I was working with the spring football people, and Mark did that. 40,000 people that were out there. But it was. Well,
yeah. Do you think David would have had a longer NWA title reign than Kerry had?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
David might have been able to later on take over the promotion and run it in a way that was 1970s, 80s instead. And I'm sure that we talked about that, and someday he'd laugh and say, well, someday. And the possibilities of what that show could have been ranks with what WWF or E or whatever it is now. If we'd have gone overseas and gone, my friend, the morning jock at Ron Chapman, got married along in the latter part of that show. the KVIL. And he went on his honeymoon to London. And he, when he got back, he said, you know, when I go to a nice hotel, I mean a really good hotel or any hotel, first thing I do is turn on the TV and flop down on the bed. So I turn on the TV, flop down on the bed, and who do I see but you doing world-class wrestling? And I thought, oh, I bet you were really excited. Did you watch the show? No, I didn't watch the show. But yeah, you know, there's another place. I mean, you could have had an international scene of this show, and you might have you could have broken it down into different leagues or programs. The possibility was enormous.
Any insight into why they went with Kerry over Kevin as Flair's challenger?
I guess because of his size, and that it looked more
real.
You used the word real, yeah. It looked more possible.
Yeah.
It looked more possible. Kevin was a great blocking back and doing his own thing when he had an event. But Kerry was this monster, good-looking kid. Everybody loved Kerry. He was just, you know, the big lapdog.
Yep.
And so it seemed to be the thing to do.
There had been constant rumors about World Class selling fake David autographs at the very first Parade of Champions. Any insight into that? Did you ever hear that before?
No, I never heard that before.
Okay.
I never.
Yeah. You talked a little bit about Kerry being a little bit out there, and he had a reputation for being a little slow. Was it hard producing him for TV spots and interviews at all?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, I would go back to the dressing room and I'd say, here's what we're going to talk. Here's what I'm going to ask you, Kerry. Okay. Now, and you say, and what am I supposed to say? Well, I'd tell him what he has to say. Okay. And so we'd go over it a couple of times. And he'd come out and I'd think, oh, it was always like, oh, where is he going to go? You know, and he was such a good guy, you couldn't get mad at him. He just that he would go off on stuff, and it never did him ruin anything. We didn't have to redo it, but it was always a question mark whether we'd get it. You know about his wedding? He didn't say the vows.
Really?
Because they were afraid he couldn't remember them.
Wow.
I mean, you know, and it sounds like we're insulting him,
right,
and I'm not. It's just a fact, because he was such a great young man to know until the drugs and all that stuff took over. He lost his foot.
Yeah, well, I'm going to ask you about that. There are many stories passed on about Fritz Von Erich protecting his kids when they got in trouble with the law. Do you think Fritz protected the Von Erich kids to their own detriment?
Yeah, I think so. I never had. I knew a lot of people from Lake Dallas. That's where they were living down there.
Yeah.
And these weren't people that were trying to get to them because they didn't have it. But yeah, there were some things that he did. And like when Kerry came back from Mexico off his honeymoon and got caught with drugs. We thought Kerry was going to prison. And I don't know how that came out. I don't know how it was saved, but he saved it some way. Lord knows how.
Gary Hart, he claimed in his book that he once tried to approach Fritz with his concerns over the fast living of the boys, but Fritz didn't really want to hear it.
Right.
Were you ever aware of that? And do you know of anyone else ever trying to counsel Fritz about it?
Yeah, I knew Gary and I talked about that. And one of the people that worked there and did refereeing and all that stuff and had been around with Fritz for years and years and years, went to him and told him that, I'm not sure which one it was. It might have been Mike after he had the accident, that they were selling drugs to the wrestlers or offering to sell them or give them. Fritz fired him.
Was it pretty much open knowledge that the kids were all using drugs?
Yeah. I mean, everybody was using drugs. Gino would be just so flaked out. He would lie there on the couch in one of the offices. Say, how you doing, partner? He said, He was just in another zone. And he was another good, fun guy, but he got too heavily into that. And, well, you go ahead.
What are your thoughts on Gino's death?
I thought there was more to it than him killing himself.
A lot of people say that.
In fact, Gary seemed to know, and Gary and I would talk about that. Somebody did him.
Yeah, we did an interview with Gary, and he had mentioned that too.
Yeah, somebody killed him.
How do you think Kevin Von Erich was able to survive all this personal turmoil? And what are your thoughts on Kevin's struggles and his strengths through all of this?
It was really amazing because I expected him, I thought he's in the middle of all this. David dies, Kerry's a mess, all this, Mike goes, that probably at some point that he would break. But I think his wife she's a very strong lady. And he came, one thing he did was recognize that this was bad. He and I, we did a feature with him, Mickey and somebody else. We did it for somebody. And we were walking through the Texas Stadium. And he and I talked a lot away from the ring and about stuff all during those years. So he came over to me, we were walking along. He said, Bill, is it really wrong to hate your father? And I said, well, I guess I said, it depends on what has occurred to make somebody have that impression, or make that decision about him. I said, but you can hate your father and love your father. I mean, there are things that my father never did anything, but I said, you can certainly disagree with him. He said, yeah, but he said, Dad cheated us, and look what happened with the boys. And he went into this thing, and he said he'd pay so and so like Ric Flair so much money, and he'd pay us the regular fee. He said, now we were stars. I said, yeah, he didn't pay you above. No, he was just paying that regular playment that he always made. So that was very telling, and I think Kevin recognized, to his credit, recognized where this was wrong. So much of it was out of control, and that he had to keep going, whatever was left of that venue.
Do you think it's fair Fritz gets vilified for what happened to his children?
Yeah. Fair that he's vilified?
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I mean, part of it, he never let anybody do anything. He always told them what to do, everything. He said, Kevin said, he's run our lives forever. We can't do anything without his okay. He had a chance, and I did too, to go to Lebanon or Israel or someplace. The guy over there wanted us to come over, and he was going to be the star wrestler, and we were going to do a series of shows, tape them, and then run them. This guy was going to run them.
Right.
And the way it was supposed to work, Kevin and I could do the most part, and then they'd fill in the other stuff. And they were going to pay me $10,000. They were going to pay Kevin $50 or something. And so I said, God, this will be great. Just to go over there, whether I get $10,000 or not. And of course, everybody could use $10,000 like that. So he called me back and said, can't do it. I said, why not? My dad has to have 30% or 50% of whatever I make. So it's going to be 50, whatever, 75,000 or 100,000 then, because Fritz had to have his cut.
Wow.
I said, how does he do that? He's got it in the contract. He's my agent. He's my everything. And, you know, Fritz didn't have a lot of social sense. He came up to me one day in Fort Worth, and I'm walking, and he says, "Bill." And I said, "Yeah, I got to ask you something." I said, "Okay. Are you a Christian?" I said, "What? What, Fritz? What's this?" He said, "Well, I just worry about you. Are you a Christian?" I said, "It's none of your business. I am what I am, and I appreciate you asking, but just forget it."
Wow. WC's, World Class had stronger religious connections than any other promotion, past or present.
Yeah.
Do you think it's fair to use the faith of the Von Erichs and the faith of the fans in order for the promotion to make money? I mean, they use a lot of tactics, such as like playing off of spirituality and morality, and
I don't think religion plays a part in sports.
Yeah.
I don't think it plays a part in that. We were on a religious station, but there shouldn't have been a requirement that we have a religious part in that show. I'm a separation of state and church, so no, I don't think you should have that.
And that would never work in today's wrestling.
No.
One of the aspects of TV production in World Class that made it so unique were the personality profiles and vignettes. Talk about your memories producing and putting those together. We talked about some of the ones that David Von Erich running into the sunset, and Precious and Jimmy Garvin. What other ones that really stood out that you remember?
We had Sunshine and Jimmy Garvin lost a bout, and they had to come out and
shovel the crap
and move the hay and do all that stuff. God, we did so many of those things. I can't remember all of them. But what?
I was going to ask you, do you remember when Kamala was going to shove you down?
Oh, Kamala. Yeah, that was dear old Kamala from Birmingham, Alabama, I think.
Yeah.
We played the part really well. We went out to the Trinity River in Dallas, and he was supposed to be out there, and we were kind of a safari or something to go out and see how Kamala lived out in the wild. And of course, so I'm standing there, and he's supposed to look at me and make some noise or something, and he trips and touches me, and I fall over in the weeds.
That's awesome.
And I said, "Leave it in. That's great."
Yeah.
So Kamala, the last time I saw him was 15, 20 years ago. He comes up and he's, "Bill, I didn't mean to push you down." I said, "Well, you didn't hurt me. That was all right." Of course, the Freebirds was the great stuff that we had too.
In the bar?
In the bar, out on the parking lot, and in a drive-in theater. They invited me out to lunch. I said, "You guys are eating lunch?" "Yeah." "Did you invite? You're going to buy my lunch?" "No." "What did you think that? Well, you invited me." No.
It was great stuff.
Yeah.
What made the Freebirds Von Erichs feud work so well?
I think the quality of those three guys, that the Freebirds, and there was enough of drama and potential big danger. You know, it was a perfect fit, because the Von Erichs are certainly such the great guys. You know, the
biggest baby faces out there.
I mean, the baby faces of all time. The Cowboys were America's team. They were America's boys. And then here are the Freebirds. It's like they've been let out of some institution. And they're just out of control, out of whack. It was like the comedy teams back, doing all their slapstick. And I think they must have seen some of that, because, you know, they would just do all the craziest things in the world.
Michael Hayes, probably one of the best talkers on the mic.
Isn't he? Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and Michael Hayes led that team. And but if you had a discussion between the Von Erichs and Michael, he's going to win. I mean, they're going to argue a little bit, but they don't know how to argue. They're the Von Erichs. They don't have to put up with that kind of stuff.
Was there any jealousy among other guys in that company as far as trying to get to the top babyface spot of the company, because the Von Erichs were always there and they didn't want anybody else to?
That's right. Yeah, no, that was well known. That was.
You're not going to take their spot.
No, and they've got to win. They've got to come out on top. Well, one day Kevin was talking about, well, what are we going to do to make this thing go better? What do we, you had all these bouts that end in non-decision, and all, yeah, and everybody. And I said, Kevin, let me ask you something. How about one day you lose a bout to somebody? What? Lose? I said, yeah, like football or baseball or any other sport, you lose. Just out lose. And then you get the chance to come back rather than these timeouts that they give every time. I said, a later promotion with somebody else down there, that was what we had all the time. Nobody ever won, nobody ever lost. And I said, this is ridiculous. You can't have a show like this. It was never successful, but...
Was that USWA? When they came down there, is that what you're talking about?
No, it wasn't. It was some local production.
Oh, okay. Going back to the Von Erichs, memories of the Von Erichs shaving the heads of Gino Hernandez and Chris Adams.
One of the great things at the Cotton Bowl, of all the places we filled up, the Cotton Bowl. And I've watched that. We have some of those tapes at home. My son's found some. And that was a beauty, wasn't it? That was so much.
What was it like in Dallas during the height of the World Class Frenzy? I mean, the Von Erichs were pretty much, they owned the town, right?
They owned the town, and wrestling was, well, it got to be, as I was mentioning, in poor old Sportatorium. We had FM stations coming out there to broadcast live from the Sportatorium. We had college kids prepped. You knew they were college kids, the way they dressed, coming out and enjoying the show. They just captured the town. And I've never thought of myself as a celebrity. I'm a broadcaster. I did my job. I hope it was good. But it got to the point where my daughter, who was about 12 or 13 and 14 something, and I and my wife would go out, drive somewhere, and we'd stop at a convenience store on the road, and somebody would say, "Hey, there's Bill Mercer," and they'd come out and have to give autographs,
right?
Which I didn't mind. I mean, that was fine. I didn't think about it. We got a big steakhouse down in Waco on the way to Austin one time. Just turned the place upside down because I was there. And my daughter finally got fed up and said, "Can't we go someplace that nobody knows you and ask you for your autograph?" But I'm the least of the bunch. I'm the announcer, and at no telling what the other kids, what they had to put up with all the time.
What was the craziest story you heard about interaction between the wrestlers and the fans back then?
Oh. Craziest? I don't know.
Did you ever have any crazy interactions with any of the fans, or?
No, they all kind of respected me, I think, because I was the broadcaster. Occasionally, Killer Carl Cox was my really good friend.
Yep.
And Killer could walk into an auditorium and cause mayhem immediately, just looking around. And they were the kind of guys that would get in trouble because some people hated him so badly. There was this one, Killer and I laughed about this one. He said, "This is the greatest one I ever had." I'm going down the aisle of the Sportatorium, and this young lady sitting there with little girl in her lap, and she has a thing of beer. And I'm walking along and in my usual bit. And all of a sudden, I notice that she hands the baby to the guy next to her. It must have been the father. Stands up and throws the beer in my face. Well, immediately she's arrested by the security. And he said, now what are we going to do? We've got a young woman with a baby, and she threw beer in my face. And they want to take her out, but you know, the baby's there, and her husband just sat there like, it got worked out, but she couldn't drink beer there anymore or something.
Memories of working with Mark Lawrence?
Oh, he was fine. He's a good guy, and he worked hard at that job. And he had a lot of friends in the wrestling community, and they tell you another story of this.
Yeah.
Killer Carl Cox. I said we were great friends, and his dad lived in Baltimore. And when Don Drysdale and I did the Texas Rangers, we went to Baltimore, and the first time we went up there. So we're in the booth and we're getting ready for the broadcast. Well, we're in the broadcast, and this guy opens the door and he says, "Mr. Mercer." So I turned my mic off. Yeah, there is this awful looking guy who says he's a friend of yours. I said, well, who is it? He's Killer Carl Cox, he said. And I said, yeah, he's a great friend of mine, but he looks dangerous. I said, no, he's not. No, he's not in the ring. He's not dangerous. So bring him on up. So we put him on the air with Don and I. He said, I just came up here because my dad's here, and I just want to come up and get you, Mercer.
That's awesome. Was there ever a moment where you thought the crowd heat was too much when you were at ringside? Did you ever worry for your own safety at all?
I thought there was a chance sometimes that they would, that things could get out of hand. But, you know, they had pretty good security there.
Yeah.
And I think somebody would lose it, and they could take care of that. I don't know if something really bad had happened and the people had gone crazy. It could have been rough. Yeah.
Any funny stories or interactions with the wrestlers while at ringside while they were calling matches? Anybody try to rib you?
Oh, all the time. You know, they were always getting me. Lord Alfred Hayes, good friend of mine. And I inadvertently caused a divorce in his family. He was leaving the area out of world class, and he said, and I knew his wife. We'd all been out and we played tennis. His wife played tennis, and tennis is a dangerous game, by the way. And so he said, I want you to be sure to take care of my wife while I'm gone. Be sure that she goes out and plays tennis and all that. And I said, okay. Yeah, well, I said, I'll tell you, whenever we go out and play doubles or something, I'll take her with us. So one day we needed another partner, for her. And this young man at the station who was not, I guess he was getting a divorce. Really good looking guy. And I said, why don't you come out and get away from the stress, and we'll play doubles and have some food. I'm like, oh, that'd be great. Was a mistake. They just locked in.
Right.
And they've been married for years now, a long, long time. But anyway, so Lord Alfred Hayes comes back for one of those cameo things. You know?
Right.
And I don't know if he knows how that his wife got with this other guy. Well, I don't know if he knows that I was I wasn't trying to make a deal there, but we were just going to play tennis. But he comes back, and we visit, and so he's in the ring, and he they fight around, and he is knocked over through the ropes. I'm sitting at a table, and right at the apron. And so they knock Lord Alfred Hayes through the ropes. Well, and they're pushing, but he is pushing himself down, ends up in my lap, and grabs me in the crotch.
Right.
I got nothing to do but sit there and try to laugh and say, I don't think Lord Alfred Hayes is in good shape.
How would you compare World Class under Gary Hart as the booker to Ken Mantell?
Oh, night and day. Gary knew what to do.
Gary was a lot better.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I like Ken, but Gary was, he just was a great booker, and he knew how to put it all together.
Were you surprised when Fritz removed Gary from power?
Yeah.
Why do you think that happened?
Gary tried to tell him things and tried to tell him how it had to be done. I mean, he wasn't afraid to go in and say, we can't keep this up. We're going to lose this thing. And he told me that. He said, and so got rid of him.
Now, were you surprised when Ken Mantell left the company? And it led to a number of top world-class names to leave the company, including the Freebirds, Chris Adams, and John Tatum.
It was. I was pretty much out of it by then. The Oklahoma City bunch, I think it was, or somebody bought the contracts from Fritz or something. But
it was probably Bill Watts.
Yeah, that was it. Yeah, and they just left, and there was nothing left. I mean, there was nobody there.
Do you remember what Fritz's reaction was when a lot of the guys left the company?
Well, they were traitors. He was through. He was really through.
Obviously, the biggest show of the year was Parade of Champions. What are your favorite memories of those shows?
I just don't remember those shows very well. Is that what Mark did?
What's that?
The Parade of Champions?
Yeah, he did a lot of them too.
Yeah, I think he did that.
The WWF was growing really strong in the 80s. Why do you think World Class didn't feel the immediate pressure like so many other promotions did?
Well, they were too successful. Things were going so great. And Fritz didn't want to contest anything, so we didn't do anything except the very basics around there, like we could have done. And that didn't put us into a real dispute with them.
Do you think it was a big mistake to break away from the NWA when World Class broke away?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
I mean, God, the system was so good. It was just wonderful. Because you always had this potential for a big audience,
right?
And the way they rotated them in and out. It was a mastermind, and I couldn't imagine that you'd give this up to have just a little local promotion.
In 1987, Ken Mantell started Wild West Wrestling and ran opposition to World Class. What led you to leave WCCW and work for that promotion?
87?
I think it was 87, right?
Yeah, but I wasn't with WCCW then.
No, you went over to work a little bit with Ken, I think.
I went over to Ken, yeah.
Yeah. Memories of working there. And what was Fritz's reaction to your decision?
I'd never heard from him. But we were through, I can't remember the exact time, but 39, I think, dropped the thing, and they went someplace else. And the guy talked to me about continuing. I said, no, this is all I can do. Anyway, I had a bad time with somebody who was taking over the promotion or something. And
for Fritz? In World Class you're talking about, right?
Yeah, after Fritz. Whatever it was. But, that part is really fuzzy. I guess I'm getting old because I can remember the first part better than the ending.
Do you remember who the person was?
No.
Okay.
But he didn't pay, for one thing. So I was out, and Ken Mantell wanted to try this thing, and we tried it, and it didn't work.
I think he eventually started to work a little bit with World Class. I think he went and started working with them a little bit. Do you remember that?
No.
Why was Gary Hart so opposed to Fritz selling Ken Mantell a piece of World Class?
Well, I don't know that either. But they were different. Those two were always at odds with each other. So I'm sure that he didn't want to be involved if Ken was there.
Gotcha.
And that was something I don't think Gary and I ever talked about. We tried to, fire up the Sportatorium again later on.
Yeah.
It was just awful.
Were you surprised when the Von Erichs sold the promotion to Jerry Jarrett?
Yeah, really was.
What are your thoughts on the promoting turning into USWA and retiring a world class name? What are your thoughts of when that happened?
I just thought the thing is over. The whole thing had gone downhill until this sort of thing had to happen to it. And Mickey was out of it. I was out of it.
Okay. What led to you and Mickey and Gary Hart running World Class 2? It was the Next Generation. I believe that was in 1997.
Yeah, the thing was dying, and Gary and Mickey and I talked. I thought the three of us, with our former world class thing, might be able to create some energy. And but when something is dead, it's dead, and none of us could do anything. We didn't have anything to do. So we tried it. I didn't have really time for it, and Gary ran it for a while and ran it himself into debt, I guess.
Do you think there's a world class curse, given how many talents from that era had died?
Well, if the circumstances of that period was what caused those people to die, I mean, I don't think there's a curse.
So it's just use of drugs.
I mean, they're running world class again. I don't know if they're going to die all over again.
Right. You think it's just the lifestyle?
It's just the lifestyle that happened at that time. It was
yeah.
Wow.
Have you ever seen any of the WCCW documentaries that are out there? The one with Chris Adams or the Heroes World Class? Or WWE even put one
Yeah,
out?
I've seen some of those, yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
They're okay.
Were they accurate or?
Well, they don't tell everything, of course. They don't get a lot of it. Chris Adams was another guy that I really admired, and we had a good time together. But the guy just there. You talk about all the things of that period. His drinking, his drugs, his going to prison, and I mean, good Lord, it just it was unbelievable.
Out of control?
Yeah, the whole world was, I thought.
I have a list of talent I'm going to ask you in a few minutes. We'll go down. Maybe you could share some stories on Chris Adams and some other guys.
All right.
But I'm going to finish up with these questions first.
Okay.
Who are the most underrated world-class talents that you feel didn't get the attention that they deserved? Who are some guys that could have been the next big baby face of the company or top heel?
I don't know that there was anybody.
What about the Simpson brothers when they came into the company? Do you think they even had a chance, or even Lance Von Erich?
Lance was a good-looking guy.
But he didn't have.
He was supposed to fill in a cousin. That didn't work. There were some groups, like the Simpsons, which I had forgotten about, of course, by now. But nobody could rise up enough,
Yeah.
And that eliminated a lot of them.
After you left the business, did you ever miss calling wrestling? Did you miss it?
I always had a great affection for that show and the way all the good things that went through it. But yeah, I missed that because it was such an important time, and it became an important time in my career, which was just about over as far as doing anything. I did football and some things around, but God, no, I never looked back. I never looked back on any of this stuff. I left the Cowboys to go do baseball, and that you just do things like that and relish the fact that I was there and that we were there together, all of us.
Did you get recognized more from your time covering the news in Texas or wrestling?
Wrestling.
Wrestling?
Why, I'm here.
Yeah, there you go.
I was in Charlotte. I get letters from people that want something, autographs or something.
Right. Mm-hmm. Why do you think WWE, having purchased the tape library and absorbing world class into their own history and timelines, why do you think that they did that?
I think they recognized a good product that could pay off. It was a different style, a different wrestling way, and I hope it has paid off for them, because that was a good show. I mean, it was different than the stuff today, but it.
You still watch the business today?
No.
No. Okay.
No.
Do you think somebody should have tried to save the Sportatorium and made it into like a landmark?
No.
Just take that place and burn it to the ground?
Take it down. Somebody wanted to make it a historical museum, and I said, why? No, I'm sorry. It was just not a kind of place you want to retain.
You still watch, or let me ask you, you wrote a book, right? What led you to writing the book about your life?
Oh, well, we had that first book, When the News Went Live, and the agent, or the person in the production company, said, you got to write a book about yourself. I said, I don't want to write a book about myself. I said, it's not that important. And she said, oh, yeah. So I said, well, figure out something, way I can get into it without. So she said, why don't you write along with it a history of how broadcasting and sports. So that's what I tried to do. And of course, wrestling was a big part of my life, so I got that into it.
If WWE offered you a spot in the Hall of Fame, would you accept it?
I suppose so. Sure. Okay. I think everybody down there who world class should be in the Hall of Fame. I don't know if they are or not, but I'm in some other halls of fame. Not as great, but yeah, that would be really an honor, because as I said, I never took it to be. I never started out in broadcasting to be a wrestling announcer. But once I got into it and things that happened like that, then it was a great part of my life, and I gave everything I had for it, and was really proud of it. I'm still proud of that show. I think what Mickey and I and the people, the directors, and all of that great crew we had, it was a slice of history, really, at that time.
Is there a favorite moment or match that you called? If there's one match that you could say you're the most proud of calling the action, what would it be?
No, not really. I remember some of them with
Kerry getting the cage door slammed on his head.
Yeah.
That was like the biggest angle of to the money.
Or Chris Adams hitting Kevin over the head out the Cotton Bowl with a steel chair and missing. And I was at the ringside, and blood rolled down like a river. And I thought to myself, don't any of you ever ask me if it's real.
Right.
Because it's real. I mean, you give up a lot of blood, broken arms, and all this stuff. And that was a good one. I don't. Gosh, there was, it's just week after week after week after week. I just remember certain shows like that where things happened, or the hair cutting deal was great, and it was fun because there was always seemingly some fun about it.
How would you like to be remembered when it comes to your legacy in professional wrestling?
Not being a wrestler and not being that athletic, or much like my career in the sports, that I certainly tried to make every time I went out, to make the show interesting, exciting, and fun. And I always respected the wrestlers.
How do you think world class should be remembered?
as a pioneer in the development of modern wrestling programs, which was strictly by accident and strictly the ideas of two guys who just had a great thought, and then one of them put it into practice, and the other one followed along and did the story. I think it was a pace setter, really, about how to take the equipment of today and make it even better.
Do you remember where you were when you heard the news about Kerry taking his own life?
I think I was at the University of North Texas, because I spent 40 years there as well as everything else. And well, a lot of that happened. He got in trouble because he went in Richardson.
Yeah,
and that was where I lived, and I had been informed about that, and I thought, God, we were talking about it, somebody, Mickey and I guess, and he was going to prison this time. I mean, he was on, and then I get the word. What usually would happen, some of the newspaper guys or some radio station, when somebody died, a lot of people left us in world class, but I would get a call and
confirm it.
Well, and then my reaction about that, or my reaction to Michael. I mean, they always call me and they told me, you can always do such a nice job with these awful things. And I said, well, I like the people, and maybe I just had a gift for doing that. But yeah, I used to get a lot of calls from newspapers. Hey, Bill, you hear what happened? Yeah. So, but I was honored that they thought enough of me that I could say the right things for these guys.
Now, after Kerry took his own life, Mike took his own life, and then Chris. At what point did you say, oh my God, again and again?
Yeah, I talked to a professor of psychiatry at North Texas who had been studying. We had a lot of suicides in a little town, Plano, Texas. You may remember that, students.
Yep.
And he was studying why this happened. And, he was, and when I told him about, I guess Kerry, Mike was the first one, and then Kerry, and then Chris. I think that was the way.
I think it wasn't Kerry first, and then Mike?
No, Mike, not Mike.
Okay,
Mike was first. Because Kerry was still in town.
Okay.
But I called him and I said, what do you think about this Von Erich family? He said, whoa, there's some problems. And we discussed the problems. He said, it looks like they don't have any way out. And then the others went that way, and I called him. He said, I have never in my life seen anything like that, and that these people the family can continue on. And I said, boy, it broke up the marriage. And he said, how is the other survivor? I said, amazingly, he does pretty well.
Did Fritz change at all after his first son killed himself? Did his personality change? Did he become humble at all, or is he the same tyrant Fritz?
He was about the same. I mean, couldn't have been his fault.
Wow. I'm going to mention a lot of different names that pretty much ran in the territory, came into the territory. You got to work with a lot of these personalities. Just give me your thoughts on these guys. Ric Flair?
Wonderful champion. Flamboyant. Outstanding athlete and wrestler. He fit the part.
Bruiser Brody.
I love Bruiser Brody. That great, oh, what a tragedy that was. There's somebody else they called me about. He was a delightful person and just a stomping around big old guy that made it on his hair and his being Bruiser. He was a wonderful guy.
Were you there when he booked the territory a little bit?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on Brody?
I don't remember that.
Okay.
But that I didn't get involved too much in that, except Gary would tell me all this stuff.
Why do you think Brody came in and out of the territory so often? Just to keep himself fresh?
Yeah, I think so. And he just was kind of an independent type. I mean, he didn't want to be hooked in with them very long.
Now, of course, when you talk about Bruiser Brody, you have to talk about Abdul the Butcher. Because they had legendary matches down in world class where they would go brawl throughout the arenas.
The Butcher just bothered me. There were some of those guys that really bothered me, and he was one of them.
Right.
And I didn't want to get close to him.
What about King Kong Bundy?
Oh, King Kong. He was probably not as talented as some of the other people, but he had a style, and he was good to be around.
Killer Tim Brooks.
Tim. I never thought of Killer as a killer. I thought of Tim Brooks. Well, why did he have to have the killer? He and I got together years after, talking about his camp that he had, and I sent a kid down there one time who wanted to be a wrestler, but I think he convinced the kid after one session that he didn't want to be a wrestler. But Tim was a wonderful guy. He really was. He's a friend.
Percy Pringle.
Oh, perfect. If he was like a vaudeville character, and he had this style, he had this irritating manner about him, assuredness. He was good for the part.
David Manning, referee.
David was the one who went to Fritz and told him that the guys were selling drugs, his kids, and he fired him.
He fired David.
Fired David, yeah.
Wow.
David Manning, yeah. David Manning was a Trojan. I mean, he did anything and everything they wanted to do. He was smart, and he was a lot more than you saw. I mean, there was a lot to David Manning. He was
played a lot of parts in the company.
Played a lot of parts in the company, and also he was intelligent and had a good conscience about him.
Bobby Fulton and Tommy Rogers, the Fantastics.
Oh yeah, those two guys. They were great. You know, I thought that they had a good deal going.
Bill Irwin.
Wild Bill. He picked me up. The picture that we have with holding on me on his shoulders.
Right.
And I told him, I said, you know what? What? That hurt, being held up there with a body like mine. I could see why the wrestlers, being as strong as they are, it doesn't bother them. But I was draped over there, and I kept saying, God, this hurts. He is a great character. And you know, his brother died.
Yeah.
And I talked to him a while back. He's up in
Minnesota, maybe?
Yeah, up Duluth.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. I said, hey, I got this picture of you and me, and they want us to, they want me to sign them. Do I owe you anything? No, don't worry about it. I'll check into it. I said, well, I don't want to cheat you because after all, you're the big part of the picture. I'm just hanging on top.
Bronco Lubitsch.
Oh, Brian. You know, my daughter was so upset when Bronco died. He was a Saint Bernard. He was, you know, that kind of guy. He never made waves, and he would never give his opinion. But what he did so well and was so loved by everybody. As a referee, even the crowd loved him. You know, and that's hard.
Skander Akbar.
Skander should have been in business for himself, selling hubcaps or
Right.
or something. He was the biggest entrepreneur type of guy, and could put on this face of pure sleaze. Wonderful guy.
Rick Rude.
You know, I didn't know Rick Rude very well, but he did okay, as I recall.
Nikolai Roberts.
Don't remember him.
That was a girl. Baby Doll. She was with she came into the company. I forgot what she did. She was with man, who was she with at first? Gino.
Baby doll. Where was I?
I don't know. We could skip on that one and talk
Well,
about Jim Cornette.
Oh, I saw him
Recently
at Charlotte.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, he's just the same old guy.
Yes.
Effusive and good personality and friendly and nice guy.
Iceman King Parsons?
Iceman. One of my favorites. I sometimes quote him when in some other sport, when I'm doing a sport, the play doesn't go in or it messes up. And I said, well, like Iceman King Parsons used to say, sometimes it just bees that way.
Yep, that was his quote.
And that's a great quote.
Brickhouse Brown?
Don't remember him.
John Tatum.
John Tatum. Well, that must have been one of the faster guys I missed.
Al Madrill?
Al Madrill. Yeah, he was a, as I recall, he was kind of a educated, maybe I got him wrong. I remember him. Go. What the heck was it I was thinking about him? He had style.
Yeah.
He had a good style, yeah.
Do you remember Missy Hyatt?
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
Jack Victory?
No.
Killer Khan. You had to remember Killer Khan. Bald guy, Japanese?
Yeah, he came in there a few times. Yeah. But I was so much in love with the great Kabuki. No, I don't mean that. I wasn't in love with him, but he was my guy, you know.
What about Brian Adias?
Oh, Brian came out of Denton, North Texas.
Yep.
Ran in some real trouble, didn't he? That was a shame. I think he had a future. You know, probably on that, not top star, but he would have been a good mid-level. But darn.
Missing Link?
Oh, yes, the missing link.
Yeah.
I saw him at that wrestling reunion 15, 20 years ago, and he was still the same. And his wife, all looking dark and like they're coming out of a Halloween show.
One Man Gang?
One Man Gang, yeah, good guy. Yeah.
Eric Embry. Do you remember Eric? He was a Memphis guy, but he came into the territory.
I can't remember him that well.
Okay. I guess, World Class had a lot of girls. We've done interviews with a lot of the boys, and they talked about ring rats and stuff. What are your memories of some of any famous ring rat stories or anything like that?
No, I don't remember that. I probably, being married and matured,
never partaked into the...
Never got around the ring rat business. But I know they talked about the on the road they had to be careful.
Right.
Yeah.
What's the craziest road story you've ever been involved in?
Road story?
Yeah. Any good road stories from their time in World Class? Traveling with some of the guys down the road? Anything funny happen or anything?
No, I never got into those things much. Gary Hart, so in that plane crash, you know about that.
Yep.
So he told me about that, and I said, and I used it in the book. Well, he also told me that back in the early times of Duke Kiyomuka. Did you know of him? Or you've heard of him?
No.
Okay. Duke Kiyomuka was in there right sort of after the war. And of course, he's Japanese American, born in Hawaii, or no, born in the States actually. But they billed him as the Japanese villain.
Right.
And it got heavy. And Fritz was the German. all that stuff. They had fights, and they took them both to jail one night. And but anyway, so I was writing the book, and Gary had told me about Duke Kiamuka being in the camp. He was a merchant seaman. Went on and on and on about this. And went to see, came back. They put him in the camp because he was Japanese American. And then he got out, and they sent him to the East Coast. And he went on, and he was a real hero because they put him on merchant ships, and he worked through the war, World War II. Well, I was going to use that in the book. And then I decided, well, I'll check this out. And it was a total phony story he told me. It was a good story.
Right.
But it was totally wrong. And I never got to chide him about it. I talked to his wife, in fact, Kiamuka's wife. And I said, I was doing research for the book and wrestling. You know, the first wrestling match broadcast, 1922. Wow. It's in the book.
Right.
And so I was talking to this historian, and I started telling the story about Kiamuka. And he said, that's not right. I said, you sure? I said, Gary Hart told me. I said, oh, no, that's nothing like that happened. And he gave me the lady, his wife, I guess, or widow or something. And I talked to her, and I asked her, and oh, no, that didn't happen. He was born here and did all, and
big work.
Yeah. I said, Gary, gave me a good story, but he could have told me the truth.
Right.
But Gary was so good. We had so much fun.
Good mind for the business.
Where are you going to show this?
Just on DVD.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you this story.
You could curse. You could do whatever you want.
Okay. Yeah, that's right. I forgot the modern era.
Yep.
The time frame was late in world class, and but anyway, so we were going to do an interview with Gary up in the old place up above the ring, and he was going to wrestle Von Erich, Fritz. This is, I can't give you the right time frame, but this was what was going on. And so my thrust was, I said, Gary, I'm glad you came up here today. I just wish you wouldn't get yourself involved with Fritz because, he's tremendously strong. Well, you don't think I'm strong? I said, yeah, I think you're strong, but I mean, you haven't wrestled a lot lately. And it was something about he lost a deal, had to wrestle Fritz. And I said, it's just that I think you're putting yourself in great danger physically. And he says, oh, you think you know a lot, don't you? And I said, no, you're that big professor of that school up there. And I said, no, that has nothing to do with it. I don't think I'm that. He said, well, I've been to school. I said, oh, well, good. And I said, when did you matriculate? And he paused and he said, 2 or 3 times a week.
Wow. That's awesome.
Yeah. And so we're taping it. The camera's shaking, everybody's laughing. And I'm trying not to laugh because I wanted to save it.
Right.
And then both of us he said, what the F does matriculate mean?
He thought it meant something else, obviously. That's awesome.
Obviously.
Right.
But that's the kind of stories off the air that we had.
Have you ever witnessed any locker room fights ever with some of the guys?
I've heard them.
Right.
I've heard a couple. And
did the Von Erichs and the Freebirds get along outside the ring?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I didn't hang around with them very much except when I was supposed to.
Right.
So I would think that the wrestlers most of them all get along pretty well anyway.
Yeah. What do you think led to the demise of world class? Was it, you hear near the end of the run, obviously David was the heart and then Kerry and some of the other guys,
I think it died off.
Do you think that
I think it died off.
Do you think they were responsible for killing the territory from, like, the Von Erichs no showing their own towns? You would hear stories that they'd be late to the towns.
I know they didn't do that well.
Right. Were you there the night when Kerry put his boots on backwards to face Flair? Did you ever hear that story?
No. No.
Okay.
No. I know the doctor told me when he had that accident that he might lose his foot. But
who was smart to that? I mean, Kerry pretty much kayfabed it from the locker room. Did you know that he didn't have a foot?
No.
When did you find out? After
when it fell off, and that I never. The doctor told me he might lose his foot, but they were trying to save it. But I didn't know that they'd already taken it out.
Right.
And he did a good job of faking it.
Yeah.
Did a really good job. But he was an athlete.
Yeah.
And he. Yeah. No, I didn't know. And that was coming down to after he left, I didn't follow him. I just didn't follow any of them after that. That whole thing broke down. But yeah, they, and you're right to ask about that, because a lot of, Gary would talk about the boys not showing up and being late, or just calling in and saying, we can't come down. And I said, hey, the pitcher can't call in and say he's not going to pitch tonight.
Yeah.
Unless he's broken his heart or hand or something. We just so that was in that period when they all were just messing up, and that hurt it. But I think for the Dallas fans, it's just the dying off, and there wasn't, and then the structure of the whole thing collapsed.
Is there anything you might want to say to your fans out there that you never had a chance to until now?
Oh, you're wonderful. I think that sometimes if you hear stories about yourselves, that you think people are making fun of you, but the older ones anyway that we had. But you're a great group of people and very dedicated, and I've always enjoyed my part being in world class, particularly.
Well, I remember coming home before we closed out at 4 o'clock after school when I was in high school, and it'd be on ESPN, and I would listen to you before we'd eat dinner, and you played a huge role in my life when it comes to the wrestling business. So thanks for being here today with us, and it was a great interview.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I'm sorry I can't pull back some of those names. I'm still trying to pull back the name of the promoter before Fritz. And but, you got to get a little older.
Well, we're just glad to have you here today. So
thank you.
Thanks again. It was a great interview.
Thanks.
TitleMatchNetwork.com